Probably most people know this, but Scott is the executive director of the Association of New Jersey Rifle and Pistol Club, and also New Jersey's only sitting NRA board member. Scott is running for re-election, so if there's any NRA board members in here, please remember to vote for him. So, I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Thank you and welcome, and I want to welcome you as I convene the Morris County government meeting today. We'll convene it. We'll start to get the meeting started right now. Seriously, there must be more public officials from Morris County than citizens, but thank you all for being here and welcome. And I want to thank the Morris County Women's Republican Club for standing strong through some controversy. Who would have thought that discussing the Constitution could become controversial? And I particularly want to compliment and thank Angelique Scholl for having an amazing backbone. Okay, let me tell you something. I am used to people folding in a heartbeat on this issue, and Angelique was right there. She was like, "We're with you 100%. I have 3 venues lined up. We're ready to go." I'll tell you something. I called her one afternoon and said, Chasing News wants to interview us. Are you free this afternoon? An hour later. I'm not going to say where, but an hour later we were talking to the press, and she conducted herself with backbone and strength and poise, and thank you. You have a great leader in Angelique Scholl. Or as I'd like to put it, don't mess with Angelique, okay? As Angelique said, I'm Scott Bach, and among other things, I'm a recovering attorney and former law enforcement. I'm a Morris County resident, and I didn't grow up in the gun culture. I actually grew up in New York City, okay? And if you ask the people I went to school with a while back, they would probably have voted me to be least likely to be the person doing what I'm doing today. Obviously, there's a lot of NRA members here. There's probably some ANJRPC members here. Let me just ask, is there anybody here, and be honest, I want to know, and it's okay, but I want to know if there's anybody here who has a problem with Second Amendment rights, who maybe has some doubts or questions or thinks, yeah, maybe this isn't right, maybe we need to rethink everything. Anybody like that here who's willing to admit it? Okay, good. And so my goal is not to change any minds here. My goal is not to change or convince you of anything. My goal is to share a different point of view, a point of view you might not have heard before, that's drowned out in the same media that wanted to drown out this speech, because there are some folks who don't want what we have to say to be heard. And as I like to say, they always talk about wanting to have a dialogue about gun rights, okay, but what they really mean is they want to have a monologue. That's what they really mean. They want to drown out anybody that doesn't agree with them. So I'm going to cover a sweeping list of topics here, and I'm going to go until Angelique shuts me down. And if there's time permitting, we'll take questions. But so let's start where we are, okay? I assume there's a lot of gun owners in the room or Second Amendment supporters in the room? Okay, yep. Okay, so let's just start with what it's like to be a gun owner in New Jersey, okay? And New Jersey's the outlier on this. There's 43 states where it's very different. Most of the rest of the country is very different here. But here's New Jersey gun law 101. I mean, you hear these stories in the press all the time about people being perfectly law-abiding citizens being thrown in jail for apparently nothing. And so how does that happen? Okay, and we'll start with this. New Jersey gun law starts by banning everything that there is about firearms. Everything is banned flat out, outright, with limited exceptions. Okay, so that means ownership, use, possession, transfer, transportation of firearms, all of it is banned except where it's allowed. Now, just for a second, well, that's true. Imagine for a second if you did that with the First Amendment. All free speech is banned except where the government allows it. Okay, it's backwards. We're going to change it, probably when we have 1 to 2 more U.S. Supreme Court justices. But in the meanwhile, that's the law here. And so that's how you get what we call law-abiding criminals. Okay, people who are perfectly law-abiding, people who contort themselves to follow the tangled web of New Jersey gun laws and get trapped in it. So, for example, let me give you the most extreme example of it. How many of you knew that you could have a perfectly legal, licensed, unloaded locked handgun in your trunk and go from your house to the range, okay, and if you stop on the way for food or fuel or medical treatment, you could go to jail for up to 10 years for that. Anybody knew that? Okay, the people have probably heard me talk before. Okay, and some of you are going, how could that be possible? Well, unless there's an exception for that stop, it's banned, and that's the way it works. In New Jersey, the exceptions are you can possess firearms in your home, the place where you bought it, target range, okay, your place of business if you happen to own the place of business, and you're allowed to transport directly to or from those locations. So the moment your transportation is broken, the moment you stop, you're now unlawfully in possession of a handgun, which our legislature in its infinite wisdom back in 2009 bumped from third degree to second degree crime. That carries up to 10 years in jail. So now you go, okay, I understand technically how that could happen, but in the real world that wouldn't ever happen, right? Okay, it happens all the time. I'm sure you guys have heard of some famous names, Shaneen Allen, Brian Aitken, all people who had some variant of this, people who were doing nothing wrong, who just ran afoul, ran into this system that bans everything except where it's allowed, and it's obviously crafted by people who don't understand what it means to own firearms and to exercise the Second Amendment. But, I mean, that's New Jersey Gun Law 101. That's in a nutshell. But, you know, you got to ask a question. Like, in New Jersey right now, they have pretty much every gun law that you could want. I mean, it's all here. New Jersey's one of the toughest gun laws in the United States. Yet there is a constant call for more. There's always more we can do. There's something more we can do. And the question is, why? Why is that? Is it because our lawmakers don't understand the issue? No, it's not. I've been doing this a long time. When I first started out, I said, nobody's ever explained it to them the right way. If somebody could just speak their language, okay, and me having grown up in New York City, I know how to speak their language, okay? That's not it. For a long time, I could never say what I'm about to say without being called a conspiracy theorist. But I'm going to say the reason they keep calling for more gun laws is that their goal is to eradicate private gun ownership. That is their goal. Now, I can say that and I can prove it right now. I couldn't do that a few weeks ago. I could a few years ago in New Jersey, but I couldn't do it nationally. Okay, what happened in New Jersey a few years ago in 2013, right after Newtown, when 85 gun bills were coming down the pike, headed our way, and we were battling them? 3 New Jersey Democrat state senators, female state senators, were caught after a hearing on an open microphone. Official state recording. They thought the microphone was turned off at the end of the hearing. And they said, we needed a bill that would confiscate, confiscate, confiscate. That is a quote. That is a fact. That was out there in 2013. Okay, it was stated on the record unknowingly. They never spoke about this publicly. But something's changed, because just last week, former Justice of the Supreme Court, Stevens, said, literally, quote, we should repeal the Second Amendment. Think about that for a second. This is a United States Supreme Court justice saying we need to repeal something fundamental that's in the Bill of Rights that has to do with your right to protect yourself. Imagine if he had said, let's repeal the First Amendment. Okay, what would we be saying? So let me just say to Justice Stevens, let's give a little lesson in civics 101, okay? The Constitution doesn't create the right to self-defense. The Constitution is supposed to protect the right to self-defense, okay? You can't take away what you didn't give. The Constitution did not give us that right. It protects it. So you can repeal all the amendments you want. That right still exists because that right didn't come from man. That right came from somewhere else, okay? And you, Mr. Stevens, just bubbled up to the surface and had your moment of sunshine again. You can go back where you belong, back into obscurity, because you, sir, have no business discussing American jurisprudence anymore. So I'll tell you something else. And that is, I've noticed, Adam, you've probably noticed this too, the last 5 or 10 years, there's been a shift in rhetoric from anti-gun politicians. Everyone is in favor of the Second Amendment now. There wasn't always a time and a place where that was the case, but now every politician, including the biggest gun banners, start out their speeches with, now I support the Second Amendment. That's actually become code for the exact opposite, okay? They've made it into a triviality, okay? And if you really want to understand what their agenda is, listen carefully. When they say, they talk all the time, we want to end the scourge of gun violence. When they say gun violence, substitute the word ownership. We want to end the scourge of gun ownership. That tells you what their true intentions are. And again, like I said, a few weeks ago, I'd be called a conspiracy theorist. I'm not. It is now a proven fact. You have to ask why. You have to ask why. And we're going to get into that. So who in society is protected by firearms? Let's start with that. Politicians, lawmakers are protected by firearms. Okay, the same people in Trenton that sit in the committee hearings and try to take away our rights are sitting in a state house with armed security protecting them. You have to go through metal detectors before you can sit in the state house. So isn't it ironic, isn't it hypocritical that those same people, protected by a blanket of security provided by firearms and qualified law-abiding people, law enforcement with firearms, are there taking away our rights under that blanket of protection? Who else is protected by firearms? Entertainers, celebrities, banks. Banks are protected by firearms. The wealthy are protected by firearms. So let me ask you, why on earth would you not protect our school students with firearms? If it's good enough for politicians, if it's good enough for the wealthy, if it's good enough for celebrities, why would you turn our children into victims? Okay? And we're going to get into that deep, and if we do have time for questions, I welcome them on them. But is it okay for a woman in a parking lot who's about to be raped to be able to have a firearm to protect herself? Is that okay? Should that be okay? Isn't this about women's empowerment? Isn't this about empowerment generally? How many of you know the story of Carol Bowne, B-O-W-N-E? Okay, not too many. Carol Bowne lived in Berlin Township, New Jersey. She had a restraining order against her violent ex-boyfriend. A restraining order is a piece of paper. And a few years ago, she applied for a permit to purchase a handgun for self-protection. She had a restraining order. She said to her local PD, I'm in fear for my life. I need a permit not to carry, to own a firearm to protect myself. It's supposed to be granted in 30 days. Well after 30 days, she was still calling the police every day. Where's my permit? Where's my permit? Where's my permit? Don't worry, we're working on it. You have this piece of paper called a restraining order to protect you. She was murdered in front of her home by her violent ex. In the end, all she had was a piece of paper. There is something very wrong about a system that says to that person, you can't protect yourself because we didn't get around to giving you your fundamental constitutional right. I can tell you when I have suggested that there should be armed law enforcement in every school, I'm sometimes met with horror and shock, and people are aghast at that notion. We should have law enforcement in schools with guns. That's going to scare the students. Think about this for a second, okay? Think about this. Would you rather have a frightened student or a victim student? And in the final analysis, and I'm going to get into this deep in a minute, but we can talk about gun policy all day. At the end of the day, at the site of an emergency, somebody has to be there to stop that emergency, okay? Hardware bans are not going to do it. You can ban all the guns in the world. I'm going to talk about that in a second. It's not going to stop something at the site of the emergency. At the moment of an emergency, somebody has to be there to stop the threat. It is, listen, it's cliche. You've heard Wayne LaPierre say it. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And in the gravest extreme, at the site of an emergency, that is true. I challenge anybody to debate that. Now look what happened recently in Parkland. Okay, we had a cop with a gun there. He wasn't in the school. Okay, having a firearm there doesn't guarantee anything other than if they're doing their job, you'll have a fighting chance. But let's just say there's a place where you can't have a cop in every school. okay, and you have a member of the faculty who's a law-abiding citizen with no mental health issues, who's been trained and vetted with firearms. I'm met with even more shock at this suggestion that in the gravest extreme, that person should not be able to have a firearm to protect himself or herself and the students. Well, think about this for a second. How did that work out in Parkland? Okay? If there is someone on staff who's appropriately vetted and trained and qualified, you better believe they ought to be able to be armed. Because in the gravest extreme, if you don't have someone there who can stop a threat, you're being set up for slaughter. There are some truths in life, okay, that it takes people a while to learn. One of them is evil is real. The government can't protect you, okay? They try, but they can't protect you. And if you're not prepared to protect yourself, you're being set up for slaughter. That's been proven over and over and over again. So, yeah, I'll say it. We pay enough taxes. There ought to be an armed presence of qualified law enforcement and or appropriately trained civilians to stop a threat in that moment. Because all the gun bans in the world aren't going to do a thing. So, some of you might be saying that's a controversial statement. I can't believe he said that. There's another little truth, or it's a big truth actually. I call it a dirty little secret that most people aren't aware of. Because most people say, in an emergency, just dial 911. Let the police handle it. Now, I'm a former member of law enforcement, so I know that police try their best. Okay? Always. And when seconds count in an emergency, police are usually minutes away. Sometimes they can't get there in time. Sometimes they never show up at all. Sometimes, as in the Florida Pulse nightclub, they will mass for a lengthy period of time trying to figure out what they do before they rush in. So, all right, so let's say the police never show up at all, or they show up late. Did you know that the U.S. Supreme Court has repeatedly held that law enforcement owes no legal duty to protect individual citizens? Yes, you heard me right. I'm going to say it again. You can look up Warren versus D.C., okay? The U.S. Supreme Court has held repeatedly law enforcement owes no legal duty to protect individual citizens from harm. I see some mouths wide open saying, I've never heard that before. How can that be? Well, there's a reason for it. There's a good reason for it, right? It's liability insulation, because if the police and government could be sued every time there was a mistake or someone was late, they'd be sued into oblivion. So at one level, I understand the public policy behind it. But what are the implications of that to you and me? What that really means in the end is, in an emergency, we're on our own. Okay? That sheriff's deputy who didn't go inside in Parkland, he can't be sued. Neither can his group. Okay, his division. There's no recourse. And so what that means is, if the same government that abandons its legal duty, okay, its legal duty to protect us, shouldn't be interfering with our own right to protect ourselves. Yet that's what we have. We're basically thrown to the dogs and then said, you can't protect yourself too, because like in New Jersey, unlike 43 other states, we don't have this thing called right to carry, which is just another way of saying the right to protect yourself with a firearm outside your home. And let me just talk about right to carry for one quick second for those of you who go, oh my God, people carrying guns in public. It's the norm in 43 states. New Jersey is the outlier. But let me ask you a question. Does anybody disagree with the notion that inside your home, if someone goes to take your life, you have the right to defend your life inside your home with any tool available, including firearms? Anybody disagree with that? Okay. Are you putting your coat on or are you disagreeing? Okay, just checking. So let me ask you this question. What changes when you step outside your front door? Is your life any less valuable outside your home than inside your home? The answer is obvious, and of course not. If your life is worth living, it's worth protecting. And if you can protect it in your home, how can you argue that you don't have the right to protect yourself outside of your home? That's absurd. It's also irresponsible. It's also unconscionable, because we're going to continue to have Carol Bounds in New Jersey, okay? People who are abandoned by the government that can't protect it, and then told you can't protect yourself in a meaningful way. So now let's get into some hardcore stuff about what you're hearing about in the news, because every day we hear that there's this new evil tool out there that we need to ban, and that somehow if we just ban this one thing, whatever it is, in New Jersey currently it's supposedly high-capacity magazines. I call them standard capacity magazines, okay? But if we just ban this evil tool, we will somehow all be safer. So let me ask you a question. Who follows hardware bans? Do criminals and madmen follow hardware bans? Do they say, I'm going to commit evil, I'm going to go do mayhem somewhere, but New Jersey has a 10-round magazine limit, I better leave my 30-round magazines at home. And there's a sign that says it's a gun-free zone, so I better not step into that zone. I mean, this is absurd. So the question is, who is affected by these things? So here's what happens. We're in this cycle where there's a tragedy, right? There is a focus on hardware. And folks, it's never about hardware. Never, ever, ever. And here's why, right? Someone who is bent on doing evil will never be deterred because a particular tool has been eliminated from society. Some of you have heard me say this before, but if box cutters could bring down the World Trade Center, does anybody think that banning box cutters is going to stop the next terror attack? I mean, it's absurd. The notion that you're going to be deterred if you're bent on doing evil because you don't have that tool available is absurd. You will always find another tool. Always. In China, where they ban firearms, guess what? They have mass knife attacks, okay? And they're covered in the press the same way firearms tragedies are covered. But a few years ago, there was the Chinese railway massacre. Something like approximately 20 people were murdered with a kitchen knife on a railway platform. How does that happen? Okay? Long before people were driving cars into crowds, we were pointing out that you can do more damage with a vehicle in a crowd than you could with certain firearms in a crowd. The point is, it's never about the tool, and that is a red herring. And so, in my opinion, there's really only one gun law we need, right? If you commit a violent crime with a firearm, we lock you up and we throw away the key. And if the crime was heinous enough, we give you the death penalty, okay? Criminals understand punishment. They laugh at hardware bans. They ignore them. The only people that follow them are us, law-abiding citizens. So who is made safer? Okay, let's look at the magazine ban that's currently on deck in New Jersey right now. So, right now, if this thing passes, and it probably will, with amendments we're working on, okay, if it's signed into law, so now you have a 10-round magazine. Okay, if you have a home invasion, your door is kicked in at 3 in the morning, do you think the criminals breaking into your home are going to limit themselves to those 10-round magazines? No, they're not going to. But what has happened to you? Now you're fumbling around in the dark trying to change magazines. You're actually put at a disadvantage to criminals. And people ask me all the time, why does anybody need I call it standard, why does anybody need a large capacity magazine? And my answer is very simple. For the same reason that members of law enforcement do. You might encounter multiple assailants. And if you're a law-abiding citizen, if you've been vetted by the state of New Jersey, and we vet people like nobody else, why does anybody care what you have to protect yourself? Why should it matter? And if nobody's made safer by it, isn't it true that those laws are targeted at us? Because for years I've been saying the same thing over and over and over again. It's like they're tone deaf. It's like, okay, if you really want to protect students in schools, why aren't you putting security there? Why are you calling to ban things here that are not going to stop the person who's going to ignore those things? And the reason is because those laws are targeted at us. It's been chip, okay? It's been exploit every tragedy, don't let a tragedy go to waste. Okay, the agenda's ready. The agenda is ready. Anytime there's a problem, they're trotting it out, and there it is. So, at the end of the day, folks, it's not about you and me, but for them it is. We're dealing, frankly, with people who I think are statists, Okay, and for those of you unfamiliar with the term, it's people who put the state over the person, and that guides everything. Okay, for them, private firearms ownership is not compatible with their worldview, because a group of people that don't have the ability to defend themselves is no longer a threat to them. So I sum up my position, ANJRPC's position, and NRA's position about these tools in this way. Defensive tools exist to repel evil from good people. And when you take those tools away from good people, you turn them into victims. That's our position in a nutshell. It's also the truth. And with a government that's abandoned its duty, its legal duty to protect you, how can you possibly justify interfering with our rights to protect ourselves? So what I'm going to do before we finish up is you guys want to hear a little bit about some of the bills that are pending right now? Okay, so I'm going to do this quickly, and then I'm going to wrap up, and I'll do Q&A if Angelique allows it. So, there are 6 bills currently that have moved through the Assembly. Some of them have been amended, some of them have been changed, but you've been reading about them in the news, so let's talk about them. One of them is this magazine ban. You've already heard most of my arguments about it, but basically, New Jersey currently has a limit of 15 rounds, which, by the way, was passed in 1991 when we passed our assault firearms ban using the exact same arguments back then. We'll all be safer. There won't be a problem. 15 rounds is it. That's all we're ever going to come for, and it's going to make everybody safer. Does it make everybody safer? No. Okay, and they're back. And by the way, they're going to be back again in the future. There's also a bill that would call for 5-round. Because think about this for a second. Anybody who thinks that it's okay to murder 10 people, okay, you know what I'm saying? Like the 10th round is okay, but the 11th is not, has entirely missed the point. What we need to be doing is to be banning and severely punishing the criminal misuse of any magazine. 1 round in a gun is too much in the wrong hands, whether it's 10, 30, or whatever. So right now what this bill would do is it would turn 1 million people into felons with the stroke of a pen overnight, because it would be criminal to keep possession of these magazines. And people have spent decades collecting these things, myself included, often paying very high prices for them. So now, right now the bill provides several options. If you're one of those people, and I've been getting lots of phone calls, I'm not going to, lots of phone calls and emails, okay, from lots of people who are panicking because they don't want to be felons. So what did the bill in its original form do? It said, you have these options. You can destroy your property, you can surrender your property, or you can sell your property. Okay, that's a taking. That is, I like to call it buy it yesterday, ban it today, go to jail tomorrow. And by the way, ANJRPC and NRA lawyers are queued up and ready. The minute these bills hit, we're going to be suing. You can count on it. We're going to get really aggressive with them. So, once again, so what is the need for 10 rounds? Here's this big thing we hear in the press, that we need 10-round magazines so that in a tragedy, okay, or in a school shooting or a disaster like that, it will force more frequent magazine changes, which will allow victims the opportunity to tackle the attacker. Just tackle the attacker. That is the solution that is provided. Now, first of all, it's nonsense, because if anybody here is familiar with firearms knows a magazine can be changed in a split second. Okay, number one. Number two, 10-round magazines were used in Columbine, Virginia Tech, and Parkland. So why would we be calling for using the same? And most people don't realize that. Okay. So listen, it goes on and on with this. The notion that you should just tackle your attacker, you're a victim, and now you should wait for a magazine change so you can rush. Listen, if you really care about those victims, you give them the right to fight back. Okay? Right to carry is the solution to that. Right to carry will stop an attacker in their tracks. Again, it's not a guarantee of anything, but it's a guarantee of a fighting chance. At least you have that fighting chance. Okay, so that's the magazine bill. And again, what we should be doing is severely punishing the violent criminal misuse of all magazines, not just a particular class that law-abiding citizens own. Again, criminals are going to ignore it. The only people who are going to follow it is us. There's 2 mental health bills, and let me just start out by saying everybody agrees that there are some people that should not have access to firearms. Everyone agrees to that. Where we part company is in how you deal with it. And so right now there's 2 bills. I'll focus on the first one. That would create something called extreme risk protection orders, which sounds good on its face. Okay, if you're someone who's a danger to themselves or others, they can come in and suspend your Second Amendment rights and seize your firearms. Now, the only problem, one of the problems with this bill, is that there's no due process in advance. So the process is this: you're in a household, or you think someone's a danger to themselves or others. You write up an affidavit, you marshal your evidence, you run into court, you argue to the judge. The person affected isn't notified. Okay? The judge has a hearing, the judge makes a decision, hopefully he goes your way. The person who's affected, the first time they learn about it is when their door is kicked in with people saying, "We're here for your guns." Now, I don't know about you, this is America. Okay, due process delayed is due process denied. If you have enough time to run into court and file papers, you have enough time to notify someone whose Second Amendment rights are on the chopping block. And there is a false premise behind these bills that has to be stated. And that false premise is that we don't have a process to deal with that exact situation, and we do have such a process. Okay, and here's a case where dialing 911 is that process. If it's a true emergency, if you think your neighbor's about to do something terrible, okay, this is a multiple choice question, A or B, right? You think your neighbor's about to do something terrible. Do you A, start drafting an affidavit, marshal your evidence, run into court, beg a judge to take away somebody's rights, okay, and wait for an answer that may or may not go your way? Or B, do you dial 911 and ask the police to handle it right here and right now? Why would you, in a true emergency, why would you even consider a slow run-into-court process? By the way, the U.S. Supreme Court has also said that police have emergency powers. They have special powers automatically. They're recognized. It's been, the jurisprudence about it is already recognized. They have expanded powers. It's called community caretaking. It's called exigent circumstances. They can do what needs to be done in that situation. So why, oh why, would we create this process? Well, there's 2 reasons why I say this process is primarily intended to harass gun owners, to be used as a tool. And I know that sounds like an extreme statement. Nobody wants people who shouldn't have firearms to have them. But the absence of due process in advance is reveal number 1. Reveal number 2 is, think about this. Does a process like that have the potential to be abused? Can somebody manufacture allegations, somebody who doesn't like you, something in a difficult divorce? Can that process be weaponized against a spouse in a divorce? Okay, you could easily protect against that by making it a penalty in the legislation to say, okay, if you abuse this process, that's a crime, so that you have a counterbalance. We're dealing with fundamental constitutional rights here. Before we take them away without giving somebody due process in advance, okay, we ought to be trying to counterbalance. We've been testifying about that for months on the current bill and for years on the second bill. I'm not going to go into the details of it. No answer. They don't want a penalty in there. They don't want a penalty in there. What does that tell you? It tells you they think it's okay for that process to be abused. Why would you not put a penalty in there? Do we want false information to be given to courts? Do we want a process like this to be abused? Are we in a society that has so said that our constitutional rights don't matter when we might not like or understand them, that we can just do whatever we want? I don't think so. So that's the deal with these mental health bills. And by the way, there are mental health bills in other parts of the country that have advanced due process and have penalties in them. Why, oh, why would Jersey not do that? Okay, next, there's a bill up that would permanently try to kill right to carry, which, as I said, is the right to defend yourself with a firearm outside the home. Again, it's recognized in 43 states, but not in New Jersey. Okay, anybody here know how you qualify for a handgun carry permit in New Jersey? New Jersey has, okay, a few of you. Okay, so here's how you qualify. You have to prove that you've either been attacked or you have to have evidence of actual specific direct threats against you. As I like to say, by the time you qualify, you'd be dead. Okay? That's the standard to use justifiable force. That's absurd. And the way it's used in New Jersey, although we technically have right to carry, in point of fact, it's impossible for the average ordinary citizen to do that in New Jersey. And by the way, ANJRPC has a current lawsuit pending against the state of New Jersey, federal lawsuit, to set that right. We hope to have that before the U.S. Supreme Court within 2 years. But, so, there's a problem in New Jersey how many of you saw last year there was a big skirmish between Governor Christie and the legislature over right to carry? Okay. Long story short, the governor found a little area where he could tweak that standard so that you didn't have to have threats or attacks if you were facing severe threats, not specific threats, not specifically at you, but if, for example, you're going into a known bad neighborhood, you could qualify. That ignited a firestorm. The legislature sued the Christie administration. Bottom line, they discovered when they passed this standard, it's called justifiable need, when they passed this standard, the legislature never defined it. It was defined by the courts, and then it was codified by the state police improperly. They took what the court did, and they didn't faithfully translate it. So they realized there was a vulnerability. This right to carry bill currently would cement the incorrectly codified standard into state statute and solve that problem for them. And then lastly, in terms of legislation, we've got a redundant ammunition ban and a background check bill. Now, let me just say, okay, once again, we agree there are certain people who shouldn't have access to certain things, okay? But New Jersey already has certain ammo bans, and what this bill does is it takes federal law, okay? Federal law bans a certain class of ammunition currently. It copies and pastes it into New Jersey law, okay? Whether it passes or fails, it doesn't make a difference because the law is the same either way. It's still banned under federal law. Yet, we have headlines, pronouncing victory, we've done something. Is anybody made safer by that? No. Has anything changed? Has anything been garnered by it? Absolutely not. So what are we doing? And as I said in testimony, I got excoriated for it by an assemblyman, but what I said in testimony is that what we really should be doing is severely punishing the criminal misuse of any round of ammunition, not just trying to demonize a particular class. It's the behavior that we need to punish, not the hardware, because when you ban hardware, you're only affecting law-abiding citizens. Then there's this background check bill, which honestly had to be taken from gun control nationwide, from Gun Control Central's template. Okay, background checks are a very different issue in New Jersey than they are anywhere else. Okay, and so there's this template nationally that says we're going to have background checks on everything, no more private sales. Well, in New Jersey, private sales are allowed, but you have to have background checks for them already. In order to do a private sale of a handgun, you have to have a handgun purchase permit, which you can't get without a background check. In order to sell a long gun, you have to have a New Jersey firearms ID card, which you can't get without having a background check. Okay? Yet we have this redundant template that's being superimposed. It's a waste of legislative resources. It makes nobody safer. It makes headlines. It may feel good in the moment, but it doesn't do a thing. So before we do Q&A, if Angelique will allow it, I have a couple of quotes I want to share with you that really just, to me, sum up the big picture of this issue. Okay, this is a quote from a dictator. Quote, "The worst mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subjected people to have firearms. History has shown that those who allow the subjected people to have firearms have prepared their own downfall." Anybody know who said that? Hitler. Adolf Hitler said that. Big proponent of gun control. Here's a contrasting quote. "Of the many misdeeds of the British rule in India, depriving a whole nation of firearms was the blackest." Mahatma Gandhi said that. Think about this for a second. So you have a pacifist who advocates nonviolence, understanding the importance of people to be able to protect themselves. And you have one of the worst murderous dictators in the history of the world calling for gun control. Here's the final word on it. Here's another quote. Quote, If you don't have a sword, sell your coat and buy one. That's Luke 22:36, quoting Jesus. What does that tell you about the importance of private firearms ownership? With that, I'll be happy to take any questions. Yes, sir.
If you have even a long gun and you want to hunt in Colorado, put it in your trunk, separate the bullets from, break the weapon down, case the weapon, and you drive across country.
Gotta stand up.
If you have a case gun and bullets separated in your car and you drive from here to Colorado, every state has different rules all the way across the country. Can they do something to make it more uniform? Because it's impossible to determine, as you said before, if I have a gun and I stop to go to the bathroom now, or somebody steals the car and the cops come up with the car, they find the guns, they're my guns, I'm in a world of trouble.
Everybody hear the question? Okay, I heard a no. Let me repeat it. The question is, the laws of the 50 states are different. How do you transport firearms?
Other than shipping.
Okay, other than shipping. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a pitch for people to join ANJRPC, because if you do, for $30 a year, or I don't know what the current membership is, you have free legal advice. You can call our lawyers who are on retainer at no charge to answer brief legal questions like that. I'm a recovering attorney. I never practiced firearms law, so my big caveat for the cameras is don't rely on what I'm about to say. We already have something. It's called the Firearms Owner Protection Act. It was passed under Ronald Reagan in 1986. And what it intended to do was to create a defense. If you're traveling with a firearm and you're jammed up in Iowa or Illinois or somewhere else, that you could have a defense. And what it says is if it's legal to begin your transportation or your journey, if it's legal for you to have firearms where you begin your journey and where you end your journey, then you can transport anywhere in between. It's a defense to a state law that says it's illegal. So now that's what it's called, the Firearms Owner Protection Act, FOPA for short. It provides a specific manner in which firearms need to be transported. However, it's been gutted. It's been gutted in different parts of the country, and the worst part is in New Jersey, in the Third Circuit, which covers New Jersey, in a case from the late 2000s that actually my organization brought when a guy was jammed up at Newark Airport. I'll skip the story, but the bottom line is, well, the pertinent part is he was traveling to PA to pick up a car. He was traveling from Utah by air to pick up a car in Pennsylvania. He bought and sold cars and to drive it back. He missed his flight at Newark, the connection from Newark Airport to Allentown, okay, probably an hour and a half drive, okay, and so he stayed overnight in his hotel and he brought his suitcase with him. The Third Circuit held that he shouldn't have done that, and that the moment he took his firearm to his hotel room, okay, that FOPA did not apply. So right now we have a split in the circuits. I'm going to tell you that law needs to be rewritten. It's definitely on the table. If you want practical advice about how to transport firearms, call our retained attorneys after you join. Yes, sir.
Scott, thank you. How do you rank, if citizens slow these bills down? Is there something on your website? Are there weak points in the Democrat Party, since obviously the Republicans are irrelevant on this topic?
Great question. The question is basically how do we deal with these pieces of legislation? Anything we can do to slow it down, right? Okay, so the answer to that is, look, we're facing a perfect storm right now. Okay, we had Governor Christie blocking bad bills before. Right now we don't. All three branches of government are against us. However, that does not mean that we are without a strategy and a plan. And here's the big picture. Number one, we fight tooth and nail every step of the way with every ounce of strength that we have. And I have gun owners who ask me all the time, well, why should I bother to do that? Why should I call? We know what the vote's going to be in these committee hearings. We know we don't have enough votes in the full houses to stop this stuff. Why should I bother? And there's at least two very good reasons. Number one is, in 2013, we were dealing with 85 gun bills at one time. Okay? They have learned that we're tenacious. They have learned that we're going to fight. They have learned we're going to make it difficult and painful. Okay? And those who don't want to see the light have felt the heat. And so what they now do is now they pick their targets more carefully. We're dealing with 6 bills, not 86. So we need to keep the pressure on. If they get the inkling for 1 second that we're not paying attention or that we've given up, it's going to be right back to 86 bills. They know they're going to have to fight us, they're going to have to deal with us, and it's going to be painful and uncomfortable. By the same token, we also need to let our friends know that we're still watching too. There's a lot of people, some of them in this room, who have risked their necks politically to support us. And they need to know that we're watching, that we're going to have their backs, and we're going to tell them, and we're going to make a showing for them, and we're going to be there for them. Because there was a time in this state when the Republican caucus was not with us. That's just factual. It's before my time doing Second Amendment activism. Our friends need to know we're watching too. So the big picture plan is we're going to fight like hell every step of the way. Every inch, every step, maximum effort, maximum impact, maximum pain along the way. At the end of the day, we're going to come in with litigation and we're going to challenge all of this stuff. Now, as a recovering lawyer, that scares me a little bit because I've kind of lost, with a Supreme Court justice saying we need to repeal the Second Amendment. There is a question about whether the courts have been corrupted or not, and whether it's been politicized and taken over. But bottom line is that's our plan, that's our action plan, that's what we're going to do. You had a question.
I do. Let's see if I can say this correctly. The notion that the guns are killing the children. How do we change this movement that's going on? But they believe more gun laws will stop what's going on in schools, and that it's not about what's going on in the family or mental illness, or that, by the way, the black market is available and only being more available if gun laws, if there are more gun laws.
Yeah, the question is, how do you get the message across that it's not the guns, given this, I don't know what I would call it, this momentum that's been building. It's a movement. But listen, it's a lot of things, but it's a steamroll. And did you guys ever wonder who's paying for all these events that they're having? Okay, I mean it's being orchestrated and coordinated. Yeah, okay, you guys already know. Okay, the answer is actually I don't know, but it is that we have to go with the truth. Okay, we have to get that message out right now. Listen, in the aftermath of a tragedy, emotion is understandable. Okay. It's very understandable, and everybody wants somebody to blame. We understand that, okay? And right now, somebody is seizing that emotion and channeling it in the wrong direction. I don't know that I think you have this, and I'm not speaking for NRA now. I think you have to let that dissipate. I think anybody, if you look at Dana Lash and her thing at that town hall, listen, she marched into battle fearlessly and stood her ground, but nobody wants to hear that message now. People want blood right now, and I don't think you can combat emotion with logic. I think what has to happen over time is, listen, we speak the truth, and when I first started doing what I'm doing, I vowed to myself, because for me it was a process. I didn't grow up in the gun culture. I came to it through a rational thought process. And I vowed to myself, if I ever came across an issue where I thought we didn't have the high ground, I wouldn't argue it, and I wouldn't do it, and I'd possibly leave the movement. And what I found over time is that, listen, the truth sometimes isn't popular. There are people with a much larger agenda. I don't know how you combat that other than what you do. The people in your sphere of influence, like the power of one person is a lot more than people realize. We all think, oh, I'm just one person. But every person in this room represents hundreds, if not thousands, of others. And another thing I think is that this viewpoint is not as pervasive as we think it is, because the people who are shouting it, that's one side of the issue. Our side doesn't like to get out and shout and pound the table and go to rallies. I mean, that's just not, it's not the conservative way. So don't think for a second that there isn't a counter movement that's going on in people's hearts. It's just they're not out marching. So I think the thing is we have to be in there with the truth. We have to take the blows. And listen, I got death threats after Parkland. I got death threats after Newtown. I'm here advocating for for empowerment, people being able to defend themselves. Okay, the notion that is responsible for the misuse of tools by evil people is absurd. And gun owners are tired of being blamed for the acts of criminals and madmen. We've had enough. And honestly, it's indefensible. So I think we keep putting the message out there. We time it tactically. We don't stop. We don't give in. And we choose our battles really carefully. We're definitely facing a tidal wave right now. And it's a scary tidal wave because along with the Second Amendment is the First Amendment and the controversy around this meeting. I mean, have I said it? Some of you may think I've said something horrible in here, but I think my message has been people need to be able to defend themselves because the government can't do it. I think that's the core of my message. So I don't know what's so horrible about that. I don't know what needs to be shut down, but we're definitely looking at a juggernaut, and we're going to have to just keep working on it. It's probably not the answer you want, but...
No, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Yes?
So I'm a student in Pro Miller. I go to Kinnelon, and so I'm totally for your gun plan with, the school that teachers should have right to defend themselves and their students. But will the guns be with every teacher? Because there would be tens of thousands of guns all throughout America in every classroom, or will it just be like three guns in each school? Because then, let's say an attack is happening in one classroom, but there's a gun somewhere else, so where will...
That is a fantastic question. Fantastic question. By the way, I've walked around the Kinnelon track many times. My parents lived in Kinnelon. And so the question for anybody who didn't hear it is, what's the plan? Are we going to have every teacher going to have a gun? Or are we going to have tens of thousands of guns throughout the U.S.? And here's what I'm going to say. A fantastic question. The answer is that no. Okay. We're not going to force them on anybody. We don't want to force them. Every school is different, is the first thing. But here's the thing. So this is now me talking. I'm not speaking for NRA. NRA has a program called National School Shield, which the media won't tell you about. It spent millions developing it. Schools can apply for grants to actually bring in people to analyze the situation in a school, to harden the school, to bring in protection. But the way I see things is you need an overall plan, okay? First line should be if we can get law enforcement. God knows we all pay enough in taxes and school taxes. We ought to be able to put at least one cop in every school. But for those teachers who are qualified, who say, look at what happened in Parkland. There was a cop there, and it didn't stop the guy. The guy went in, and for that teacher who's qualified, who's been trained, in other words, they're not just a guy you give a gun and say, here you go. The process of doing this it's very intrusive. There's background checks. You have to be trained. You have to prove proficiency. If you've done that, and if there's a teacher who says, listen, law enforcement's going to do their best, but in the event, I don't want to be the guy in Parkland. Okay, I don't want my students cowering in a corner in a ball waiting to be slaughtered. I want the ability to fight back. If that person's trained and qualified, you give it to them. You don't force it on people who don't want it, and you don't give it to people with mental health issues, and you don't give it to people with criminal backgrounds. I hope that answers your question. Okay, great, thank you. Yes?
The status of our ability and right to have ammunition and to store ammunition in New Jersey?
Don't give anybody any ideas. For the most part, ammunition possession and storage is lawful in New Jersey. There are some classes of ammunition that are banned, including armor-piercing ammunition, meaning that will penetrate heavy metal. Incendiary and tracer rounds, which can start fires, are banned. But pretty much the possession of ammunition is not heavily regulated at the moment. There are certainly moves to do that. There's moves to register ammunition. Nothing that's on the plate now. Okay. Yes, sir. Okay. That's all right. Thank you.
What I'd like to know is how is it the state of New Jersey gets away with trampling on the Bill of Rights federally? How does that happen?
The Constitution's not self-enforcing, unfortunately. They can pass whatever law they want, and unless somebody challenges it, that's going to be the law. That's what happened in New Jersey. The courts within New Jersey self-reinforce, they ratify and rubber stamp everything, and so far the U.S. Supreme Court has declined to step in. The day is coming when that will change. But that's a great question, and thank you. Yes?
You talked about waiting for the government to come to our assistance, but what we didn't talk about was what happened out west when the government came armed and the family stood up just as armed and backed them down.
About that.
Okay? So you remember that family? Maybe you can tell people what happened there.
Well, which event are you talking about?
I'm talking about the event when the cows couldn't eat in the grave.
Yeah, I think I'm going to skip that one today. That one's a little bit beyond the scope of
Well,
what.
what I'm saying
Yeah.
is, the government came against these people, and these people stood up with their arms against the government. They faced them, they wound up in jail, and they wound up going right up to the top court, and they wound up winning.
That's right.
And so sometimes you have to stand up against your own government, which is why we have the Second Amendment.
That's right.
And that's what we need to do, is to stand up and say, you're not taking away our guns. Why is that?
I think you said it better than I could. Yes.
Any other groups that stand with gun owners on the issue of taking, the whole concept of police coming to your house, taking something and selling something that belongs to you. It might be your gun, but it could be your car. If you can commit, if someone in your family can commit another family member, maybe because of something they said at dinner, or, without that person having the right to defend themselves, aren't there any other groups that are standing with gun owners to say, hey, this just isn't right?
You mean like the ACLU? No. No, well, interesting, I'm sorry?
The ANJRPC?
Well, yeah, there are certainly gun groups that are on the same page. I don't know if you were talking about firearms groups. Certainly the NRA, certainly the Association of New Jersey Rifle and Pistol Clubs, okay, certainly stand for these. But if you're asking me if there are other social groups outside of the Second Amendment sphere, largely the answer to that is no. We're very isolated. I didn't see any ACLU outrage when they tried to shut down this speech. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, in another context, the ACLU actually did weigh in, and there's currently a lawsuit pending in New York City against New York City for wrongly prosecuting people who have knives. The ACLU was actually on our side on that one, but it's the exception rather than the rule. We're fighting a very lonely battle, a lonely and unpopular battle. Unfortunately, it's honestly up to us to change that. Yes.
In response to the demonstrations that all the young people did across the country in respect to Parkland, there is a woman, I don't know if anybody has seen it, she was on Facebook, and she's actually trying to put together the same type of demonstration countrywide in response to the rights of the gun owners in Second Amendment. So for those of you who have not seen it, go on Facebook and look, because she is trying to rally the troops in response to those demonstrations.
It's set for April 14th, and it's supposed to be in every state capital. There's supposed to be a demonstration, but again, I would just point out, our guys are the ones who like to sit home. They don't like to get out and shake their fists. That doesn't mean there won't be a turnout. But listen, ANJRPC just held a rally in Trenton on a Monday morning, and we had over 2,000 people there, and we shut down traffic, and the state workers were grumbling and what have you. But by and large, our guys like to stay home.
Why not?
Well, listen, that's a good question. Why that doesn't... Well... Yeah. Was anybody at the rally? Okay, several of you. Okay, excellent. Thank you for being there. But you see in this room, listen, we put the word out. Anyway, that's a topic for another day. Yes, sir.
I believe this week in Massachusetts, a judge ruled that you have no right under the Second Amendment to have an AR-15 or an assault rifle type rifle because it's a military-style rifle, and the Second Amendment doesn't apply. Where's that going to go?
Well, it's going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and hopefully the U.S. Supreme Court will do the right thing. But as I said before, let's pick that apart for a second, because here we have exactly what I described. We have somebody saying there's this evil tool. If we could just eliminate it, everybody would be safer. Okay? How many of you know that these so-called assault-style firearms are functionally identical as firearms that look like your grandfather's World War II rifle? I could show you two firearms side by side. One is an evil black assault-looking firearm, and one is your grandfather's wood-stocked gun with oil finish. Okay, they both fire the same round at the same rate, same power. What's different? One is cosmetically incorrect. So if you ban that, is anybody going to be made safer by it? Absolutely not. Can somebody take the other firearm and run into a school and do evil with it? Yes, they can. You can do that with any firearm. Let's just be honest about it, okay? But banning the constitutional rights of several hundred million people is not the solution to keeping victims safe. Great question. Anything else? Yes?
When I went to my NRA course, my beginner course for firearm safety, the first thing my instructor told us was that if we were at home and we were confronted by somebody coming into our home to do something bad to us, that we had to exit. I then asked, what if you have children upstairs? He said, doesn't matter. You must exit the home. I looked at the people in my course and I said, do any of you have children? Would you, if you had a baby in a crib upstairs and you could get out the door, but your child was upstairs, would you leave them? I don't have children. I have my husband, who is a decorated Vietnam veteran, who I would defend my husband. I also have an old deaf dog. I said I wouldn't leave her either. Can you address if you're in your own home and somebody comes in and maybe you can get out, but you have loved ones that can't. We have a lot of multi-generational living. If you have an elderly parent, somebody with dementia, somebody they can't take care of themselves. How can at least that to be in your own home and protect your family? How can that be changed? And the other thing I'm going to say, I'm being very brave saying this, I am a social worker. And I view the idea of leaving your family, especially a child, that is neglect. If somebody comes into your home and they're going to try and hurt your family, you have a minor child and you run for your life and you hopefully grab the iPhone and dial 911, that child could be killed. That is neglect.
These are some great questions. First, is your firearms instructor in the room?
No, literally.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because you need to get him a membership in ANJRPC so he can call our lawyers, because that's not the right. He didn't describe New Jersey law properly. Actually, New Jersey has a pretty good defense inside the home law. Okay, there are some states where you have a duty to retreat from your own home. Jersey is not currently one of them. New Jersey doesn't have this new round of things that happened post-Hurricane Katrina, which was called stand your ground laws. The antis call them shoot first laws, but that's not really what they are at all. They're inside your home. Your home is your castle doctrine, it's called. Your home is your castle. You don't have to leave or retreat from your castle. But that is not the law in New Jersey. You can defend your life inside your home in New Jersey. Yes. Yeah, Deb, go ahead.
I just want to say I'm an NRA instructor and a training counselor, so I train instructors. That's not part of the syllabus, and the last thing I want to do is give legal advice to anyone. So whoever your instructor was, that's not on the agenda, that's not part of the syllabus. So I'm sorry that you were given that information.
Thank you.
But you do what's right.
Other questions?
I have one thing.
Sorry.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Susan. I'm from Passaic County. I live in Wayne, and currently there's a parcel on Route 23 that is going to be converted from an old Fuddruckers, or another restaurant was there, into a gun range. It hasn't even gone under construction yet, or reconstruction, and there's already petitions and protests being planned for this parcel. Have you been contacted by anyone to come help that situation out?
I actually have not been contacted, but I'm very well aware of the situation.
Wonderful.
Well, in the wake of what happened in Ramsey, there was a Ramsey range that became a huge controversy, and some Second Amendment activists came in and blew it up, and and the developer eventually went away, but we're aware of it. Part of the issue is we're not good for a new range. We have to be sensitive about the situation because if the NRA is, or what's perceived as the NRA comes in the middle of a sensitive discussion between a developer and the town, we can polarize the town. If they want our help, we're there. But they have to make an assessment whether they want it and we need to make an assessment whether our mere presence could change the dynamic. So, but it's a great question, and listen, the larger, more disturbing trend is that we want to shut down your free speech, we want to shut down your right to exercise your Second Amendment because we can't have a range not in my backyard. I mean, in the Ramsey situation, we had people saying, you know, we don't want the criminal element coming to Ramsey. Okay, which is, do criminals go to public ranges where they have to provide their driver's licenses? I mean, come on. Anything else? Okay, thank you all so much.